Thank you for coming and listening to what I have to say about secure pork supply today. How many of you have heard about the Secure Pork Supply Plan? We have a few. A lot of times when I give these talks, this has been in the works for a few years now, as you'll see, that I like to give just a little bit of background, especially for those in the room that haven't heard a lot about secure pork or aren't quite sure where it fits into the foreign animal disease response plan. So today we're going to talk a little bit about managed movement and what that's going to look like in a foreign animal disease response. And then we're going to talk about where the secure pork supply plan fits into that, focusing on the components of biosecurity, traceability, and surveillance, or what we refer to on the website as disease monitoring. I just want you to be aware that the secure pork supply plan isn't the only secure food plan out there. And you may have heard about the secure egg or secure turkey plans. They're now being combined into the secure poultry supply plan that was utilized different components in the high path AI outbreak in 2015 and since then. On the foot and mouth disease side of things, we have the secure milk supply plan, secure pork, and then secure beef started a few years ago. While milk and beef focus on FMD, secure pork, we got a little more ambitious and thought we'd also include classical swine fever and African swine fever diseases that we talk about, because all three are trade-limiting diseases for the pork industry. The milk and beef was funded by USDA, as is the Secure Pork Supply Plan, but the Pork Check Office also provided funding for the Secure Pork Supply Plan. So just a few things to note that are common across the secure food plans, that they have all three and are being developed with input from industry, state, and federal officials, as well as members of academia. They are voluntary. This is not a mandatory program. This is something that producers can prepare for and implement on their site while preparing for a foreign animal disease. The components, again, are biosecurity, surveillance, and traceability. We're going to talk just a little bit about the movement permit, and risk assessments are something that are being done. University of Minnesota is doing the risk assessments for secure pork. So as they come up with things that will help reduce the risk of moving these diseases around and that we need to add into the secure pork supply plan, it is a dynamic plan, and those changes will be made. Those are ongoing. Again, these are guidelines. It's not a mandatory program. So foreign animal disease in the United States. If we would get infected with foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, or African swine fever, again, these are all trade-limiting diseases, but we do have the game books for these. These are the Red Book for FMD and CSF, and then it's the disease response strategy for African swine fever. And these are the documents that the animal health officials will utilize in carrying out the response when the disease occurs in the United States. These are available if you Google them online. You can look them up. They're available for your viewing. Be prepared, though. I know that the FMD Red Book is around 240 pages or so, so there's a lot of information there. And again, this is the response guidance for the state federal officials. So if we got infected with one of these diseases, part of what's in those response plans or Red Books talks about how they set up the zones and how they handle the infected premises, or what their options are. So if we have an infected premises with one of these diseases, it, of course, would be identified, and then they would put a zone around that infected premises called an infected zone. And then around that would be a buffer zone. Those two components make up the control area. And that's going to be important as I talk about the secure pork supply, what happens in that control area. So be aware that that's the infected zone and the buffer zone together. Then you're going to have a surveillance zone around the outside of that. And then there's going to be a free area. So that looks really pretty simple. You've got some nice circles there. You're looking at the the infected premises. But it complicates things when we start adding all the other dots there, or all the other premises that are located in those areas. So if you look there in the red and the blue area, which is our control area, you have that infected premises, but you have all these other premises that are there. And of course, in a real world situation, there's going to be more dots than that in that area that are not infected. But what happens in that control area is there's going to be movement restrictions imposed. But what happens to those people that are not infected? And those movement restrictions will apply to them. You know, and we have some beautiful circles there, but what happens If in a state it happens to be that it's either the entire state as the control area or a series of counties, again, there's going to be movement restrictions on animals and animal products in those areas. So movement will be by permit only, by the animal health officials issuing permits, and it'll be based on the risk of that movement. How risky is it for them to allow that movement to occur off that premises? So that's where the secure food supply plans come into play. It's for those sites that are affected by those movement restrictions, but not infected with the animal disease. So just so you kind of have an idea what we're talking about. I pick on Iowa because I live here, I'm from here, and it's got a lot of animals. So if you figure that Iowa makes up the control area, if those pink dots are the infected zone, and the blue area is your buffer zone, and that's your control area, look at the number of animals there. I mean, we have around, and this is kind of older data, but it still gets the point across. You have around 20 million hogs affected, over 2 million cattle, and around 110,000 operations that would all be under movement restrictions in that control area. So what would happen on day one of an outbreak? Well, there's going to be no new movements initiated from that control area. So as soon as they're diagnosing where this infection is, they're going to set up their circles, and they're not going to allow any movement from what we understand from that control area. But what happens to all those animals that are already being trucked from that area, right? So you have animals, they say around 1 million pigs on the road. You have cattle going to slaughter. If it's FMD, it's going to tie in the cattle, the sheep, the goats too. All these animals are moving around. So if you're not allowing any new movements, all those animals that are already in transit have to go somewhere. And one thing that we talk about in comparison to help kind of make the point is back in 9/11 when you had the planes in the air. And we're not trying to minimize what happened in 9/11, but it kind of helps you with that concept. You have all these planes in the air, and they have to go somewhere. They're instructed to land, and so you had some that went back to the airport where they started. You had some that landed somewhere along the way, and you had some that were allowed to continue on to their destination. And then nobody was allowed to take off for, I believe it was 3 days, if I remember correctly, before they allowed airplanes to start going again. So that's going to be the situation most likely that we're going to be dealing with, is that these animals are going to go somewhere, whether they're allowed to turn around and go back to where they came from, whether they continue on to their destination, or where there's a site that they go to along the way. But they'll need to be handled. And then producers will need to be able to manage their animals until movement permits are issued, and they're allowed to actually start moving those animals again. So as with 9/11, when the airplanes started taking off from the airports, there was a lot of new security measures in place, right? And so that's where we come in. What's going to be different? So if you're in a control area and you're not infected, but you're affected and now you need movement permits, what do you need to do to be able to show that you're a minimum risk and that this movement is ready to occur? So I'm going to talk today about the enhanced biosecurity measures, some of the surveillance that we're looking at, and the movement permits. So things will change when moving animals after that initial diagnosis is made. So again, permits will be issued by the animal health officials. They may be required for all movements onto or off of a premises. I know in high-path AI, like the feed trucks had to go and move under permit and so on. Manure had to move under a permit, so be aware of that. But officials need to balance the risk of allowing that live animal movement or that other movement to occur with the possibility of spreading disease versus, of course, what's going to happen if you have weaned pigs that need to move and they're not allowed to move and you're 3 weeks later, there's going to be some severe welfare issues. So we're talking euthanasia or, how are you going to deal with that? So that's where the Secure Pork Supply Plan comes into play. Like I said, it's for those that are affected by the movement restrictions, but not infected with the disease. And again, it's voluntary. If there's a site that doesn't need to move for a while and can kind of hunker down, then that's an option that they have. So we do have a plan. It's a 7-page plan. It offers the guidance on what would be included in the Secure Pork Supply Plan. It was developed, as I said, over years of collaboration. Again, voluntary. I talked about the funding, and I'm going to show you some of the resources that you have at your disposal. And we're going to talk a lot about the website. So This last year, we redid the Secure Pork website. So it's a securepork.org, and I'm going to refer to a lot and help you kind of figure out where the resources are if you want to start participating in the Secure Pork Supply Plan. So if you look there with the red circle, that's where you can find, this is on the home page, the landing page right there, that you can find the 7-page plan to read it. There's a 2-page summary, and there's also some 1-page promotional kind of handout there. If you also notice at the bottom, I'm sure you can't read it, is that we have right down in here a overview video. It's in its final stages of review. It's about 4 minutes long versus the webinar that is listed that I'm sure you can't read right there, that's 46 minutes long. So people would much more like to read a 4-minute overview or watch a 4-minute overview than try to sit and watch something that's 46 minutes long. So that's going to be coming in June once it gets through the final review process. Everything that I produce, I do in collaboration with other individuals, and it's reviewed through a lot of different channels. So the diseases in the plan I mentioned are foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, African swine fever. We like to make sure that the public is aware that none of these are a public health or food safety concern, that the meat is safe to eat and the milk will be safe to drink. The reason that the exports will be shut down is a lot of issues on if they're a negative country, there's a lot of trade implications if they would get the disease into their country. And there's also a lot of political motivation behind some of that too. So you can find these. These are just 1-page informational handouts. You can find those, again, right down there on the website. They're in English and Spanish on the landing page if you want to use those. Just very briefly about the 3 diseases. Foot and mouth disease is the most contagious disease of animals. It causes blisters on the snout and on the feet in pigs. They got blisters on the feet. They could slough the hooves in some cases. They're going to be lame. They could run a fever, and they're not wanting to get up most likely and go get something to eat, so they're going to lose some weight. Classical swine fever, also known as hog cholera, we did have in the United States, eradicated it in 1978 or so. And we actually have had several outbreaks of FMD, but the last one was in the 1920s, so that's not something we're quite as familiar with. But if you look at the pictures there for classical swine fever, now granted, FMD, some of those lesions could look a little bit like Seneca too. But classical swine fever, again, you're looking at conjunctivitis, pigs laying around not feeling well, fevers, weight loss, diarrhea. Again, how many production diseases could you say, well, PRRS can do something like that. Salmonella could do a little something like that. So that's kind of some of the concerns we have, is how many of these look a little bit like what we already have here. African swine fever, and you have a low virulent strain and a highly virulent strain. And the highly virulent strain in Europe, they're finding more likely is going to cause abortions or higher death loss, a little bit higher fever maybe, and some purple ears or purple in the groin area too. The spread of the virus is pretty much anything that comes out of the animal could be contagious. The milk, semen, urine, manure, saliva, breathing, aerosol. ASF is also transmitted through biting insect. So let's talk about biosecurity when it comes to the Secure Pork Supply Plan. What is biosecurity? I'm sure most of you in here know. It's a series of management practices designed to prevent the introduction and spread of diseases onto or off of a farm. One interesting fact from FMD in 2001 in the UK is that they found that UK farmers with good biosecurity procedures were 5 times less likely to become infected than those that didn't have biosecurity measures in place. So some of the things that we have included under biosecurity are the Biosecurity Manager, a site-specific biosecurity plan, the perimeter buffer area, and the line of separation. And I'll talk a little bit about each of those. The Biosecurity Manager concept came up after HiPath AI. And the reason for that is they were finding that even though they had biosecurity in place on the sites, or they had their plans, is that they weren't always being followed. Compliance was an issue. And so they now, in their plans on the poultry side, they call it a biosecurity officer. We went with Biosecurity Manager because a lot of times on the production site, the employees are used to the role of a manager. And so we go with the Biosecurity Manager. And I'll talk a little bit about that and what the others look like here. So the Biosecurity Manager is someone on the site that is going to help write the site-specific plan. They're going to make sure that the employee training is occurring and monitoring it, and that there's compliance on the site, that everybody is following the biosecurity measures in their biosecurity plan. I know of some sites that are working on their biosecurity plans right now. We ask that a veterinarian be involved, and what they're doing on some of those is they're having the site manager, and I'll show you the resources, write the plan, and then they're having their veterinarian go through it and see if there's changes that need to be made. So the plan, again, is a site-specific plan. It explains how the site meets the list of measures in a checklist, and I'll get into all of this. But the important thing here to note is that we do ask for a map of the site with some different things labeled, and that's going to be really useful to help drivers coming on the site, employees, and so on know where some of their boundaries are, traffic flow, that sort of thing. This site is one that they were clients of mine when I was in private practice. You can see the driveway that cuts between the buildings. Those are both finishing buildings. And implementing secure pork would mean that that would not be allowed. They'd have to start driving around the exterior of the buildings. So it'd be rerouting some of that. Again, that's where the maps come in handy. So routine biosecurity is not enough. These are diseases that our animals here in the United States are naive to. It's going to hit them pretty hard. They're going to be highly contagious. They have no immunity to them. So the biosecurity measures we have in place, it's going to take what we're calling an enhanced biosecurity. So some of the resources, I'll show you where these are on the website, is this checklist. So the idea in the checklist is it has biosecurity measures the site needs to meet. If a site already has a biosecurity plan in place, we don't ask that you write another one. We just ask that you go through this checklist and see if you have everything in the checklist in the plan, or add it to your plans that you already have in place. We also have an information manual, and that's a longer document. That's around 40 pages. And that just gives you ideas if you're having trouble trying to understand one of the concepts or figure out how to implement it on the site. It's got some additional information on how to do that. And then this last year, we added these biosecurity templates. So for sites that don't have a biosecurity plan, we have these templates. You can take them, and there's one that you can do electronically, so you just download it and type in the information, or there's the other one there that you can print off, and once you print it, you can handwrite in your information for your biosecurity plan. So this is what the website looks like. And again, I don't expect you to be able to read it. I just want you to understand how to navigate. So if you go to the website, again, it's securepork.org, you'll look at the top and you see the list of stakeholders across the top. And pork producers is one of the stakeholders, of course. So then this drop down here on the left will come up, and biosecurity is one of the things listed. So you go there. And then if you look where the red arrow came up down here, that's where you'll find the checklist that you can download. The information manual there, I mentioned, is right next to it. So you can just easily, like I said, bring that up to read that. Again, down there's the templates, the red arrow. So those you can find both the write-in and the type-in versions down there. So I'm going to talk just a few minutes about the perimeter buffer area, because that's a new concept for a lot of people. In our working group was Dr. Jim McKean, who is an extension veterinarian at Iowa State for many years. Really great guy. He had envisioned this concept. And the idea is it's an area around the buildings that serves as an outer control boundary. And if you can minimize the viral contamination around the buildings, can you reduce the amount of virus or reduce the risk of carrying virus into the building? And then you only enter that area around the buildings through the access points. And this can look different, and I'll get into that in a minute with some maps here. But then you also have the line of separation. So for animals that are housed indoors, the line of separation is the walls of the building. And of course then people and items, and there's many sites that do this right now, they cross over that line, they take biosecurity measures. It may be that they change into site-specific coveralls and boots for that site, shower, wash hands. I know depending if it's a sow site or a boar stud or a finisher site, that those will vary a lot of times in today's world on the measures that are taken when you cross that line of separation. So this might be something, an example. This has obviously buildings that are connected via a walkway. So again, your red line is your line of separation, and I think there's the perimeter buffer area. So the idea is that if you get equipment into this, and again, this is during the outbreak, that you have a C&D station, that equipment coming into this area has to be C&D'd. Again, the idea is to reduce the amount of viral load around this area if equipment needs to move or people need to move. And then again, you take extra measures when you enter the buildings, which again, there's your line of separation. You could have an access point for your line of separation at the back if that's where the deads are going, at the front where the loadouts occur, where the employees enter, that sort of thing. I know some sites that have a perimeter fence, and they're using the perimeter fence as their perimeter buffer area. And then if that's the case, again, anything that enters, so if you're having employees come in and park coming through the gate, they have to C&D those vehicles as they come in an outbreak, because they could be bringing virus in off the road if the entire site is included in the perimeter buffer area. And the big thing that comes into play here is when you have a person that comes in, and in this situation, this is just a very small, like a garden shed where they put 2 doors in. The employees come in, they wash hands, change into coveralls and boots for the site, come out this door, and then they can walk in here. And, they go into, these are all finishing buildings. And the idea is that you enter a finishing building and there's not a lot of room in there. And so a lot of times it used to be that we always had boot baths. Well, we know how well those are all maintained. So the idea is that you mark your line of separation inside the building as you go in, where there's very little room, and you change boots. So that breaks that cycle and instead of the boot wash. So there's different ways, site layouts are different. There's different ways that these can be drawn, and we give you the freedom to figure out what works best for your site with the movement on and off and so on. So again, those are found. I talked about the site map. So we have a bit of information there on how to create that, where you can go and how you can get the map, and then what to draw, what needs to be included on your map. So those resources are also available. We have some biosecurity posters that are available through the pork board, and I'll show you here how to get those. There's one for producers and employees, one for visitors. They're in English and Spanish. And we also talk about biosecurity training, and I'll show you where to get that. These are short videos. Right now we have the first 2 up on the website. The third one, I'm hoping by the end of the week. The line of separation will be by the end of the month, and we're still getting a few pictures for the bench entry. Those are going to be in English and Spanish. So they're very short. I think one is right around 4 minutes long. The first one talks about how important it is for biosecurity, why we worry about it. The next one talks about not bringing disease to the site. So where you can encounter animals, my family, they like to go deer hunting, so they don't wear the boots that they wear out deer hunting and then wear it into the site where they work with the pigs. So, because there's a risk of disease transfer. So things like that. The perimeter buffer area one just talks a little bit about the perimeter buffer area. So if you're having a hard time understanding exactly what its function is and stuff, you can watch that and so on. So those are all available under the training. So again, across the top, on the far right are training materials. And then again, you have the side drop down, so you can go under the biosecurity. And you can see there the red arrow. That's where the training videos are all going to be. There'll be to where you can watch them through YouTube, or you can actually download them. I know that was a request for some of the sites that are working on implementing the training, is they want to be able to download it, so when they go to a site that has poor internet connections, that they can work with the employees there. We tested these on a couple different pilot projects, and they seemed to be best delivered with a lot of times it was a veterinarian that came in and sat down with a bunch of employees. They watched the videos together, talked about it, and then everybody signed the sheet and they attached what was on the agenda, and that's the biosecurity training. As long as they know, the big thing is that the employees need to, or the people, or I'm the owner of the site, that I understand the biosecurity that I need to implement, why it's there, and how to do it on my site is the big thing. Helps with compliance. Again, the biosecurity posters, if you look at the bottom and where the circle is, that's where there's a link to the pork store, and it tells you what to enter if you want to order those laminated posters. They are free to pork producers. You just order them and they're happy to drop ship you a whole, they call them a push pack. It's got some other information I'll show you here in a second. One thing that we talk about on the biosecurity side is contingency plans. That it's good for you to have a contingency plan. In the Midwest, it may be a snowstorm when you're trying to C&D equipment. What are you going to do? It may be in the Southeast, a hurricane, those kind of conditions. Stop movement is big. So during that time when movement is not allowed to occur before you get your movement permits, make sure that you're doing everything in a biosecure manner. If you have to euthanize some animals, how are you going to dispose of those without bringing disease onto the site when you're doing so? And then the big one is manure storage. If a permit is not granted to move manure off the site, what are you going to do? And again, that's one of those permitted movements that happened in the high path AI outbreak. So let's talk a little bit about traceability. Of course, you're all probably familiar with the premises identification number and how important that is. For those that don't have one, you can get one from the office of your state animal health official. It needs to include the valid 911 address, latitude, and longitude. And the big thing is, when a lot of times when people started getting PINs, they were associating with the office or a house and not necessarily where the animals were located. So people are looking at this now and making sure it's where the animals are actually located. And if you have any questions in your state, talk to your state animal health official on how they would like you to do that. Because one of the complicating factors, if it's if I have 10 sites and I use one PIN number and one of those sites comes up positive, all the sites are associated with that PIN number. So that can make your life very difficult in a hurry. So make sure that, again, if you're trying to associate those with multiple sites, talk to your state animal health official and they'll help you work through that. And what you can work on, again, pre-outbreak, these are the things we're talking about. You can do the biosecurity plan, you can do biosecurity training, you can get the PIN, and you can start associating that PIN with your diagnostic samples. So there's a lot of diagnostic labs that are working on making sure that you can start including that PIN. And you can even include it with the samples. You can print them off the barcodes. And so if you go, again, back to the website, and there's over here on the left, the premises ID number. It includes, it talks about there the state animal health officials and here. And if you click on either one of those, it'll take you to this page. And the reason we have you go to this page is because they do a really good job of making sure all the state animal health officials are current, all the contact information. So right there, you just click on it and you download. So for those that have animals in multiple states and things, you've got all the state animal health official information right there that you can contact them. And then also I wanted to point out, we had a handout here now that the pork.org has changed a little bit. We need to get that revamped. But if you go to that website there, it's that you can validate your PIN and you can actually print off your barcodes for your diagnostic samples. So it will take you to that location and then you can get that done for these diagnostic submissions. We talk about keeping records, especially on animal movements. That's very important. Electronic records are preferred because they're easier to access, of course, in an outbreak. But we do have copies of paper copies on the website, too, for those that don't have electronic. We did work with the PQA information. And so there were some forms in PQA that we could use the same. And so you'll see on the right over there that there's some of that information now that's double logoed, and you'll find that on the website. So we're not asking you to fill out 2 forms or do something different. We tried to accommodate what you're already doing for PQA. Maintain a visitor logbook. Again, that's something that we've double logoed too. So again, those forms can be found under the movement record tab on the left. And you can see right in there, there's the animal movement, the visitor log, and the vehicle and equipment movement. Because that's one of those things, when they do trace back and trace forward during an outbreak, they are going to want to know what's come off and on the site to know what risk your site is to allow for a movement permit to occur. How at risk is your site of being infected? So, of course, surveillance or disease monitoring is very important. So we've in the plan we talk about swine health monitors, and these are people that are caretakers that can recognize abnormal production parameters or clinical signs, and that they look for these on a daily basis. So for those of you that care for pigs in the barns, this is something you're already doing. I mean, you're looking at the pigs every day. You're looking for signs of illness. That's all we're asking you to do, but just make sure that you are familiar with the signs and the parameters that can happen with one of these foreign animal disease outbreaks. So to help you with that, we have some posters. And if you, again, go to that website, the pork store, and enter I'll show you here, the right number that you can get. These are included in those push packs. So if you enter for a push pack, you'll get these 3 posters. You'll get the biosecurity posters with that too. And again, they'll ship it to you. They're big laminated posters to hang in the barns. They're available in English and Spanish, so you can get Spanish push packs and English versions. You can get both. So again, we're back to the training materials, the disease monitoring, and we're looking at the observe section here now, and that defines, what those swine health monitors are. They're the people that look for something that's off. And again, down here is where you can enter the number. You click on the link, enter the number, and it'll get you that order for the English or Spanish versions. And then we also are working on, there's the posters too. And then we're also working on some videos. I have an FMD one in review right now, and then we'll come up with an ASF and a CSF to, again, short videos to help give you more information about those diseases. So, we look at this, and as I mentioned before, is that Seneca virus or is that FMD, right? Diarrhea, is that Salmonella or is that CSF? Abortions. Is that a virulent strain of PRRS or is that ASF? So it kind of drives home talking to the production employees and making sure that they know when to contact a veterinarian, a manager, somebody, as to come and do an investigation, look more into what the problem is, that they're attuned to knowing when to call whoever they're instructed to call. So, and again, visual inspection only gets you so far, and then we talk about doing some diagnostic testing. And we have some different information. We're looking at oral fluids and nasal swab collection. I know there's a lot of research being done. I'm hoping that those are both validated tests or samples that are available for those tests. And so one thing that we're working on this year is what a sample collection certification program would look like. So what happens when you are a site that is enrolled in Secure Pork, it's during an outbreak, your site shows no evidence of infection, and you need samples collected and submitted to the diagnostic lab to prove your point so you can get your movement permit. Who do you want coming on your site to collect those samples? Wouldn't it be much better if when the outbreak is to the sides that the state and federal animal health officials don't have the resources to send someone to your site, which again, biosecurity would be a concern if they did come. But wouldn't it be great if there was somebody on that site that the state animal health officials said, yes, I've agreed with the training program that's been come up with, and you've been signed off on being allowed to collect those samples. And so if you're a person that has went through the certification program, then you're allowed to collect those samples, and we trust that you're collecting those samples. So that's something we've started some discussions on what that would look like, to get the state animal health officials to agree that that would be something that they would allow to happen. And then it would be a matter that the site would say, okay, we want to submit samples, and the state vet says, yes, go ahead, you've been trained. So we're working on that. Again, this information's all under training, the disease monitoring sample. And if you look, there's oral fluid, and then there's the nasal swab information. We're all working on getting all of that in English and Spanish also. Usually I get asked a little bit about vaccine. As most of us in the room know, there's not enough. That there are FMD vaccines out there, classical swine fever vaccines, and there's a lot of people working very hard, especially on the FMD side, to get additional funding so that we do have more vaccine available in an outbreak. So right now the situation is we wouldn't have enough until we were a little ways into the outbreak. But be aware that there is no vaccine anywhere in the world for African swine fever. So that's another dilemma too. All right, so again, I've beat this to death, I think. SecurePork.org is where you can go for the information. I've tried to kind of help you, guide you through it. If you're a veterinarian in the room, there is a tab for you. A lot of it is the way it brings you back to the producer side of things, because that's where your role is, as far as Secure Pork many times, is to help make sure that this is implemented on the production site. We do have a little bit, there's a lot more going on the packer side. That's been an area that we haven't developed a lot, and I know that there's different groups that are now working on what that might look like on the packer side, biosecurity measures and things that might have to happen at the plant. And then we've got some of the official documents for the regulatory official side of things, and then I talked about the training materials. If you have any questions, there's a couple places on the website. There's a contact us. If you click on that and send a question or something, that comes to me, and I'd be happy to follow up with you. If there's anything that you need from me, just go to the contact us and I'll get it.